most people relate to, I want to have a little bit more money or a specific car or a house or a relationship, whatever it is, right? But they think about the future in the wrong way.
So often we get attached to our ideas, our concepts, and that attachment can then lead to emotional backlash.
Instead of complaining about the future, take control of it. You decide how it's going to look like.
Easier said than done, though. It's easy to say, be present.
You always have a choice to either look for the obstacles or you look for the opportunities. When we change our relationship with the future, we should think about...
Welcome to the Mark Divine Show. I am your host, Mark Divine, and I'm thrilled to have you here today. Your decision to tune in shows a shared pursuit of the extraordinary and a journey into the uncommon. I love to talk to folks around physical and mental toughness, resilience, finding purpose, breaking barriers, evolving consciousness, spiritual truths, and I have an incredible guest today, a visionary author of What's Next Is Now, How to Live Future Ready, Frederik Pferdt. He was Google's first and former Chief Innovation Evangelist and the founder of Google's Innovation Lab, where he trained tens of thousands of Googlers to develop and experiment with cutting-edge ideas. He also taught groundbreaking classes on innovation and creativity at Stanford University's Business School and to organizations like NASA, the United Nations, Adidas, FBI, MBA, etc. I am excited to have Frederik here on the Mark Divine Show. Thanks so much for joining me, sir. Frederik, it's great to see you here on the Mark Divine Show. I appreciate your time here.
Thank you so much, Mark, for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. What's next is now, how to live future ready. And you don't talk about technology. How can we talk about the future without talking about AI and the coming explosion of exponential tech?
Absolutely, yeah. And that's actually on most people's minds currently, right? When they think about the future, right? They have these visions of flying cars and robots and AI and everything related to that. But what I feel is that this is just one part of the future, right? And what I'm more interested in is what is your future about, right? So what's the Mark future that you want to see happening? And for me, it's really about changing people's relationship with their future, as we don't see the future as something objective and far out in the distant. I want to help people to see the future as something that is very close, that is in your control, that you decide how it's going to look like. And that is, I think, a helpful conversation to have, because that gives people a lot of confidence. It gives a lot of people also a lot of hope to see a future happening that they actually want to see happening.
Well, that's fantastic. I completely align with that. In fact, one of my practices that I teach is a future me, where you ideate desired future and then create a practice around that to instill the conditions right in the matrix, if you will, or in the universal consciousness for that reality to manifest or to come about. It sounds like almost like you have a deep spiritual practice or meditation practice which is guiding some of your insights around this.
Absolutely. So can you share a little bit more about that practice? I would love to try that out myself.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know, I'm sure, but the idea that space and time are concrete is not reality, right? So it's a construct of the mind, and so we can then step out of time with our conscious awareness, our witnessing process, which takes a little bit of work to develop that awareness, and from that witnessing awareness, we can then we can take control of our timeline, so to speak, by generating a future state image, which then becomes a memory of a desired future. And just like a memory is something that happened theoretically in the past, and then we concretize that memory, and then we project that memory into the future as anticipation and desire, catastrophization. And so we can use our mind deliberately in a future state to set the conditions for, that desired future, which then becomes a memory. And then you practice that memory instead of the past memories, which keep you trapped in the current state. How this works, is probably beyond the realm of any kind of scientific, evidence-based, discussion. But I've had some pretty profound experiences with this. In fact, when I tell this story in my book, when I had decided that I wanted to be a Navy SEAL. At the time, I was a certified public accountant in New York, and I had a visualization practice as a result of my sports performance, coach at Colgate University. And so I decided, just quite intuitively, to shift my visualization practice to a practice of becoming instead of like a performance practice. And I created a image of myself going through SEAL training and graduating and thriving. And I practice it every day after my meditation, every morning. And I was just going on blind faith that this would have some sort of impact. And about 9 months into this practice, it takes a long time, to get into the SEALs, Frederik. So it's not like a call them up and you show up the next week. It took me like a year and a half of constant work, and a lot of that was this mental work. But 9 months into that practice, I had this sudden shift, this radical change in understanding that can only be described as a sense of absolute certainty that not only was I going to get into the SEALs, but I was going to, crush it and graduate and be a Navy SEAL. And literally it was a week or so later that the recruiter called me and said, "Hey, Mark, congratulations. You got the one slot open for SEALs, this year, or open for officers, coming from the civilian world."
Hey everyone, this is Mark Devine, founder of SEALFit, Unbeatable Mind, and I'm super stoked to announce that my new book, Uncommon, is due out from St. Martin's Press this summer, July 16th. And we've launched a pre-order campaign. You can learn more about that at readuncommon.com to try to get early awareness for the book, which I hope will help a lot of people, where I go and do a deep dive on the 5 mountains of personal mastery: physical, mental, emotional, intuitional, and spiritual. Uncommon, simple principles for an extraordinary life. Check it out at readuncommon.com, and thank you for your support and being part of the change that you want to see in this world. Hoo-yah, Divine out.
So that's an example of what I'm talking about, creating a future state image of a desired future, and then you actually literally live it in your mind every single day.
Wonderful. Such a beautiful story about this notion of that the future is yours to create, and that the past is just a memory, right? And the future is just a dream, and only the present is real. And so that's why our minds love to, go back to the past or go into the future, but it's really hard for our minds to stay in the present. And I love this exercise you shared because it's really powerful to think about the future, again, not as something that most people relate to when they think about their own future, which is like, I want to have a little bit more money, or I want to have success, or a specific position, or a promotion, or a specific car, or a house, or a relationship, whatever it is, right? But they think about the future, I think, in the wrong way, because what I think, when we change our relationship with the future, we should think about, how do I want to be in the future, right? Do I want to be a more kind person, a more open person, a more empathetic person, a stronger person, whatever it is? And I think that's the qualities that we then can not just envision and imagine, but can work towards. And there's some powerful research going on at Stanford University that you've probably heard of, which is that we can try to really empathize with our future selves. And the research really finds that when people connect to their future selves, so meaning that they have more empathy with their future self, that really motivates them to engage in double the amount of retirement planning that they actually then do, or live more healthier lifestyles right now. So they've shown, when they projected their future self-image to people, so meaning like they wear VR headsets and they saw themselves in like 20 or 30 years out, with AI that's possible, right? You can project an image that is your older self, that they could empathize with that person and trying to really connect with that on a deeper level. That means that they change the behaviors in the now towards, again, what I said, like 2 times more, putting more money into retirement funds, but also live a healthier lifestyle. And I think that's very powerful, because you don't need VR headsets. You can do the Mark Divine kind of like practice, where you're actually trying to just envision your future self, your future me. And then you can combine that with something that I want to share with people, which is like, don't project like an image that is about like something materialistic, right? project an image about how do you want to be in the future, right? Because that's something you have full control over.
I 100% agree with that, and that was what was going through my mind as you were saying that, is the future self is a becoming, right? It's not a doing. I mean, I think that like the field of manifestation, like The Secret, where they got it wrong was most people really were trying to visualize or manifest, things, the fancy cars and the beautiful house, and the money in the bank account. But and that may or may not work. Typically, even if it does work, it doesn't change the underlying nature of the person, right? So you're talking about the becoming. Like, what is the person you need to be worthy to be that future self? In fact, that's what when I described the SEAL story, it wasn't so much the accomplishment; it was who I needed to be worthy to be a Navy SEAL officer and leader, and to try to embody those and to bring the energy to that, and then investigate where the gap was in my current day reality that needed to be closed.
And that really speaks to that quote that really influenced my life, which is from my niece Nin, who said, "We don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are," right? And so you're really moving away from this notion that the future is something out there and objective, or even the reality and the world is something, out there. You're moving towards like understanding your inner self and who you really are. And, you can then see every situation that you encounter, every moment, really as you are, right? Are you open? Are you curious? Are you negative? Are you positive, right? And I think that's very powerful if we move that away from like the situations being as they are towards understanding that we see the world as we are. And so that is a powerful shift that whenever you do that, I think that can reveal a lot of opportunities for you.
Do you believe, Frederik, that you can get information from your future self? I mean, again, take this from the spiritual non-duality perspective, right? Like, everything is already happening, and then we come into this physical world, and then we create time with the brain and the mind. So it's plausible that the future has already happened. And there is a practice, and we teach this as well, but some people have success with it and others don't. And I think it's probably largely because of belief, where you actually created an image of your future self, and then you, in your current self form, go visit and have a conversation, or be open to receiving some guidance.
I think it's a beautiful question you ask. For me, I would ask myself, like, what's the benefit to receive information about your future self or from your future self? I think for me, it's more important to connect with my future self on a deeper level, right? And making that connection really helps me to have a more positive image about my future self, right? I think that's the starting point where most people, I hope, are not putting out a vision of their future self that is more negative, that is less successful, that is less happier, all of those notions. I think it's the opposite, right? You're always projecting a future self image that is more successful, more happy, more connected to others, having better relationships and so forth. And that's for me really what boils down to being a future optimist, where I feel like you're always looking for the better in every situation. And that's something you can practice, you can do. And with meditation practices, I think you were off to a great start to train your mind towards building a better future image about yourself. But there's definitely other practices that, you can engage in and do, definitely. And I just want to encourage everyone to get in that spirit of experimenting towards training your mind and make that stronger in any form and any sense, because your mind is already tricking you every day, right? It gives you like all the negative thoughts, it gives you kind of like the worries, it gives you all those things that mostly lead to an answer that is no, right? It leads you to be defensive, it leads you to not open up to something new. It doesn't lead you to possibilities and opportunities. And so you can trick the mind back and say like, hey, I know that you want to, create safety for me by being more negative or like looking for the mistakes or having that default no that always shows up when we have a choice. But you can trick the mind back and say like, hey, I'm going for a yes. And that was really determined in my life, where I literally in any situation chose a yes instead of a no. And that yes really helped me to explore, allowing me to follow my curiosity, to tap into something new that I haven't learned before or discovered before. And all of those opportunities basically were just starting with that little word that is yes, that your mind just doesn't like. And I see that in my kids every day, right? And you see it with elderly people too, right? Where a no is the default answer to most new things. And I always question and say like, hey, just think for a moment what a yes would actually do here in this situation, right? What's the worst thing that can happen? And when we play this exercise, then we really see that you always have a choice to either look for the obstacles that are in the way, or you look for the opportunities. And that's, I think, really powerful as we understand more about our inner selves and our mind. I think we can become those people that look for opportunities, instead look at the obstacles that are in the way to, do something great.
I love that. I teach that the obstacle is the opportunity. In the SEALs, we said there's no such thing as failure. It's not because we didn't expect to, air quote, fail. It's just that we saw only learning. Every obstacle was just an opportunity to learn a new way to do things or not do things. So you were chief innovation officer at a small company called Google. What part did your did this kind of philosophy play into your innovation skills, or and kind of the corollary is that something you kind of are able to bring into a culture, or is this more of an individual skill?
Yes. So being the chief innovation evangelist for Google for quite some time, I learned that the future really is not about technology, is not about a specific single vision of a tech company or an individual and so forth. The future is really about what you make out of it, right? And it really is determined by what I would say your mind state. And a mind state for me is that perception in every moment that really determines how you experience the present. And we all know mindsets, right? That's a very common language that we always use. I think you've heard that probably in your life a lot, Mark, right? Being a Navy SEAL, and like that really is ingrained in our language, in our cultures, that mindset is so important. And I totally agree. What I also observed is that mindsets are really hard to change, right? Because it's based on our belief system, it's based on our past experience, it's based on our values. And so what I wanted to do is move beyond mindsets and move towards something that we actually have control over and can change in the moment. And that is a mind state, because that's your perception, again, in every moment, that it really determines how you experience the present. And we have control over that, and we can change that immediately. And for me, that was one of the observations I had working with, some of the most brilliant and brightest minds in Silicon Valley and beyond, right? At Stanford University, but also at Google and in other organizations, was that whenever people had a specific mind state, and I call that a future-ready mind state, where they saw opportunities instead of obstacles, where they were curious, where they were empathetic, they wanted to experiment, and where they were open, those are for me like 5 dimensions of a future-ready mind state combined with optimism. They were optimistic. Whenever I observed that, magic happened, right? They really were innovating. They were creating something new. They followed through on an idea. They were really building the future, literally. And so what I wanted to do is help people to tap into their future-ready mind state as well. As optimism and openness and curiosity and experimentation, empathy are things that we all do from time to time. And we're all born with a deep curiosity, right? And we're open from time to time. But what I've learned is as soon as you dial up all of those dimensions, more opportunities for you will actually happen. And there's a guarantee that whenever you're more optimistic, whenever you're more open and more curious and experiment more and more empathetic, that whenever you dial these dimensions up, I think you find more opportunities in your life and you can actually create the future that you want to see happening. And I think that's a promise that is very powerful. And I've just observed that in every single person that I've trained and coached and worked with in these organizations, that it's always coming back to these notions of deeply human qualities that we all possess and that we all have. But at the same time, we can all grow and train to become better at being an optimist and being open and so forth and being curious. And so that's really what I'm trying to help people with now, is taking all these lessons that I've learned and that I was fortunate to learn from these brilliant minds at Google and at Stanford University and so forth, and really give that to everyone in the world, because I believe that this is something that everybody can tap into.
Easier said than done, though. I mean, essentially most people live based on memory, like I said earlier, projected into the future, and which keeps them from the present. And so it's easy to say be present, or the power of now is so valuable, and it is. But it's much harder for folks to do. So how do we get people to, disconnect from the conditioning of memory-based projection and thinking, so that they can be more present, where they can then experience openness and curiosity and empathy and those things?
Yes, I think a great starting point is caring less about the past. Mm-hmm. There's this great quote from the cricket in Times Square, a children's book, which says, "I can't choose where I come from, but I can choose where I go next." And how often do we have conversations about, blaming the past for our current actions, or saying like, this really bad things happened, this really bad thing happened in my past, or whatever the situations were born into or where we come from. I think focusing less on the past and focusing more on the present and the future, I think, is a great first start. And that really speaks to that notion that there's two worlds. There's an outer world, that's everything outside of us, right? Society, technology, events, and people around us. And that's constantly changing. And we can't control it, right? It's just happening. Change is happening all the time. However, we do have the power to influence it through our actions and the choices that we make and how we interact with others. And we can really control that. And that's gearing towards the inner world that we can train ourselves in to have more control over our thoughts, our emotions, and our beliefs. Just like the outer world, I think we can't control everything that happens inside us, right? The universe will give us a thought or an idea, and it just, appears from time to time, right? We all know that. Anxiety is coming up, or excitement is coming up, right? But we can control and train ourselves to respond better and to control a little bit more our inner world. And by cultivating practices like you said, mindfulness and reflection, and becoming a little bit more adaptable and have that more positive outlook, I think this training really helps us to move towards feeling that the outer world is a little bit less chaotic. So as soon as you start to feel that the outer world is less chaotic because you now take care of your inner world, you're connecting the two worlds. And I think the magic really happens when we connect these two worlds. And as I said, we can train our inner world. We can do these practices to approach the outer world with more purpose and more confidence. And so I think that's the powerful thing that we can do, that we all should engage in more, instead of like talking about the past or complaining about the past or even complaining about the present or the future. Take control of it by saying like, hey, I want to be more open. I want to be more curious. I want to experiment more. I want to try things and so forth. That's what you can control. That's the attitude that you can bring to every situation.
I agree with that. I often say that there's not one world out there. There's 8 billion worlds, human worlds, and then almost an infinite number of other worlds, from other creatures that, big and small, that some we're not even aware of. And then yet most people believe that the co-created or consensus reality is the world. This is how you can have heaven and hell on earth simultaneously, and all sorts of gradations in between, right? The quality of the inner life and the responsiveness to, the conditions that are, the contextual conditions that are, present, allows one to create, like you said, that relationship with the outer world, which then quite literally will change your experience. And it'll change the people in your life. If you're shifting from negative and pessimistic to positive and optimistic, through an inner practice, then you're going to experience the world and people in it as positive and optimistic. And the pessimistic and negative people will suddenly just disappear from your life, or you'll have to forcibly remove them if they got a hook into you somehow.
Yes, I think that's very powerful, right? And so you can do this exercise, very, very simple exercise, which is write down these 3 qualities that you want to embody in the future, and just reflect on why these qualities are important to you and why and how they can influence your path. So, a quality could be exactly as you said, like I want to be more optimistic or more positive, or I want to be more kind or more loving, whatever those qualities are, right? And then whenever you have a chance, right, bring those qualities back into your imagination about the future and really kind of like make those tangible in a way that you envision situations where these qualities show up, right? In your relationship, when you talk to a stranger, when you are frustrated with something, right? How do these qualities then show up? And I think our mind is the perfect vehicle to really imagine that future then and make that future also happen. And as soon as we can do those practices more and more, I think we can definitely create the future then we want to see happening. And where we started off our conversation with, that notion where most people immediately tune out and say like, yeah, I can make that future happen that I want to see happening, right? Because of X, Y, and Z. You're moving away from these obstacles and say like, I can actually make a future happen where I'm more kind or more loving or more open. That's totally in my control. And I think as soon as people realize that and walk away with that notion about the future and their future, I think we help to shift the relationship with people's future, and that can be life-changing, I hope, for a lot of people.
And it doesn't have to be some far out, vague, distant future. I mean, one of the things that I do in my morning ritual, and when I'm finished with my meditation practice, I'll do that broad-based future me, but then I collapse that down to the today, and I'll do what we call in the SEALs dirt dive. I will visualize myself going through my day and show up the kind of person that I want to show up, right, in all the interactions. For instance, this podcast, I visualize it. Visualize myself having a phenomenal conversation with you, and inspiring people, and lifting the veil for those who are ready to hear certain things. So that can have a profound effect, right? And I notice when I miss that because I'm traveling or for whatever reason, then sometimes the quality of the day just isn't quite the same. I'm also reminded, I've done a fair amount of therapeutic work in the past, to eradicate traumas and whatnot, post-traumatic stress issues and whatnot. And one of the cool things that I experienced was EMDR, eye motion dissociation reprocessing. And most EMDR is where you use imagery and then some sort of bilateral stimulation, either your eye movement or tapping or like little buzzers. And so you then go back in your mind with your imagery to an event that was traumatizing, and you just allow it to kind of be revisited, so to speak, and just see what comes up. And while that bilateral stimulation is going on, and what it does is it kind of releases emotional energy that is trapped in your nervous system, and it has a pretty profound effect. It's been very successful, helping veterans heal from post-traumatic stress and others. But you can also do this in a forward future state they call future templating, which is very similar to what we're talking about, with the addition of the bilateral stimulation, which is then kind of taking that future image, that desired state, and then kind of rooting it in your nervous system.
thanks for sharing that. And it's so powerful because then we change the whole conversation about therapy, which usually has had this focus on, overcoming trauma and talking about the past and bringing those moments back into your memory, focusing now on not the past but the future and saying like, hey, how do I want to be in the future? What is something I want to work towards? And really kind of like creating those memories, as you said, about in that future, which is very powerful. So we're shifting the focus from the past to the future. And that is something that as soon as you do that more often, that could be, again, like life changing for a lot of people, because then we're getting out of these loops, always, thinking about the past and what happened and so forth, that we can't change anymore and can't influence, right? Because the past is gone by definition, and focusing on like what we still can create and where we should actually focus on, which is the future. And so that is totally fascinating and interesting. And I think the more that we do that, even supported with different treatments, different forms of practices that you can do, exercising, not just physical exercise, but really mind exercises, right? That really help you to have more gratitude, for example, or to help you to focus on what's the positive in a situation. Or as you said, like use the obstacle as the opportunity to understand what can I learn from this and how can I become better. I think is incredibly powerful and so helpful, hopefully, to a lot of people.
I definitely want to kind of reinforce this point for listeners. I'm a big fan of emotional development. I think it's really important because, emotions drive kind of energy. And oftentimes, you could have a high IQ and a low, emotional intelligence or a low emotional awareness. And you're going to keep torpedoing your goals and aspirations. But with therapy, I do think what you said is so true in that too many therapists and too many people constantly kind of rake themselves over the emotional coals of the past, which is actually keeping that past alive, right? Because wherever you give energy, you actually magnify, whether it's a memory or anything in the outer world. If you give it energy, you magnify it. And this is why, like every war on fill in the blank has actually made it worse because you're adding energy to it, to that system or that structure. And so there's probably some benefit in developing an awareness around the traumatic events, but then the best practice is acceptance and forgiveness at that point, right? So you can move beyond it and not just keep trying to understand, and trying to trap that energy even further.
Being and creating the future is forgiveness, right? As soon as you can let go of your past and accept it, moving towards forgiving whoever was involved in that past or even forgiving yourself, I think you have accomplished almost everything, right, that you need to accomplish to now shift your focus towards the future. And I think we need to get better at that, right, to really having forgiveness as something that is part of our daily lives and part of our daily conversations that we have. And because as soon as you forgive, you can move on, right? The thing is done. You accept that it happened, you forgive, and you actually learn from it, moving forward. And that's such an interesting thing. In my work, again, like working with these incredible bright minds, helping them to come up with better ideas and to innovate, I always focused on also what you have said, which is emotions, and emotion not just regulating, but like emotion understanding. As innovation is such a emotional process, right? Coming up with an idea creates an emotion that is excitement in the first place, right? Oh, I have this idea. I know how to solve this problem now and make that problem for billions of people go away, right? That's the first excitement that you have. But then the idea is so fragile that whenever somebody tells you like it's not possible to do, you're disappointed, sometimes even angry, sometimes frustrated. So there's like another three emotions that are showing up. And then you're trying to make this idea a reality. So you build your first experiment or your first prototype and you try it out, right, on a small scale. And then you learn like a couple of things might fail. It might not turn out to actually make the problem go away, or like some parts will break and so forth. So you get in this cycle of like you want to give up, right? You're not motivated to move forward anymore, and so forth. And then you're trying to look for, again, acceptance from other people where they say like, oh, this is a great idea, you should do it, and so forth. And as soon as you don't get that acceptance, right, you're frustrated. You think like there's something wrong about myself, about the idea, or your approach, and whatever it is. And then sometimes the idea might actually succeed, right? So you're creating something that really impacts people's lives. And then again, like you feel this humility, right? You feel like, oh, wow, I'm now part of something bigger. And you feel like you're involved in something that is bigger than yourself, right? That's an emotion that is also very tricky to handle. So you're moving through these waves of different emotions, right? And so for me, helping people to understand when you innovate and create something new, that there's emotions that will appear that you need to understand in the first place, and then work with your mind to really not just regulate these emotions, but work with those, right? Because sometimes excitements can move you forward. Sometimes a setback or like overcoming obstacles can move you forward. Distractions can actually help you to make the ideas better, right? If you're distracted and say like, oh, I learned something over here when I was distracted that might actually influence my idea and make it better. Great, right? Use that. So it's a very interesting thing to focus on, and most organizations and most CEOs and leaders that called me and said, "Hey, Frederik, can you help us to innovate more?" My first understanding was trying to observe like how our emotions handled in these organizations. How can people speak out, ask questions? How is a failure dealt with when it happens? And so that is something that is truly fascinating and for most people unexpected when they think about innovation and when they think about creating the future.
That's fascinating. And my thought is going right now is this idea of attachment, right? So so often we get attached to our ideas, our concepts, and our creations, and that attachment can then lead to emotional backlash, right? Especially if it doesn't turn out or people discredit it or criticize it. And that plays kind of with the yoga concept of non-attachment is a good practice in and of itself, but it's also the outcome of a meditation practice because of what you were describing earlier, where you begin to develop a sense of I am not these thoughts are happening, but that's not who I am. And so your ego identity begins to dissolve, and with it is replaced not attachment to the outcomes and those ideas, even your creations.
And Tom G, who I feature in the book, who I worked with at Google for quite some time, it's one of the 14 people I feature in the book. I call them future readies, who really build remarkable lives for themselves around how they wanted to be in the future, right? Being open, being curious, and experiment, and so forth. And Tom G is that one person I think who just lives experimentation and prototyping and giving things a try. And so he uses that quote around attachment is the biggest enemy of innovation. And I think that's very true, right? If you think about that, where you just said like how ego is showing up when you attach yourself to the idea, and when you learn that something might actually not work out in the way that you had envisioned it. And I think that's truly true.
Even if it does work out, you can be attached to your brilliance and your creativity and and so then the pressure is on to always kind of recreate the next best thing, and that's a fool's errand as well.
Absolutely. And so we have that fear of failure that is a natural instinct that's been passed down from our ancestors. And they had to worry about things like being eaten by a big predator or eating poisonous plants. Those were the fears back then. And today we still want to feel safe. But most of the things we do in our lives aren't that life-threatening anymore. And we just have to realize that. Our minds haven't realized that. Interesting. They're still telling us like, there's going to be a predator that's going to eat you, or the plant is poisonous. Sure, if you're climbing a mountain or jumping out of a plane or working with wild animals, you need to worry a little bit about safety, absolutely. But those activities can be dangerous without proper precautions. That's what we all know. But when it comes to everyday things like starting a diet or lifting heavier weights at the gym or creating a big vision for your future or talking to your to your crush that you just fell in love with or applying for your dream job, the risks are much smaller. So ask yourself, what's the worst that can actually happen? And most of the time, the worst thing that is happening that you'll be exactly where you are right now, right? That's the status quo that you will encounter. And so maybe you'll feel a little embarrassed if you fail, but you'll still be safe. And I think many people hold back because their brains trick them into thinking any failure is as dangerous as being bitten by a snake. And they don't stop to ask, what's the worst that can happen? And in most cases, again, the answer is simple. You'll just be back at square one and you haven't changed anything. So it's for me fascinating how we can become better at dealing with or understanding failure, and that most things are not life-threatening. But the most dangerous thing that can happen is that you're not making any progress.
I always like to ask myself, will it matter 5 years from now? And usually the answer is no, I won't even remember this. Then what about 5 months from now? And it's like, no, probably won't matter then either. What about 5 weeks? No. What about 5 days? No. What about 5 hours? Probably not, right? Then you get it down to like, will it matter in 5 minutes? Not if I let it go. It won't. So, Frederik, tell me about your meditation practice, your daily rituals that help keep you in these states of openness and curiosity and optimism and empathy.
So I like to take an approach to my daily rituals that is really driven by experimentation. So I like just to experiment a lot with, things others have tried or I've read about or I've learned from friends and so forth. So that actually got me to my first 10-day silent meditation retreat a couple of years ago. That really was
Vipassana or
exactly an experiment in Southern California here, which really taught me the power of focusing on your mind and how everything is changes, right? This notion of impermanence. And that was truly mind-opening for me because then I started to experiment with my own practice, which I have now. Every morning I go up out of the house around 6 a.m. and I sneak up into a little A-frame here in the woods, where I have my little meditation cushion and I can see the sunrise, and I can experiment with different mindfulness and meditation practices, right? Like body scans or like future visioning and so forth. Really trying to understand how beneficial they are and like which works for me, which doesn't work for me, and to come down to this notion of it's all a practice, that the power is in trying those and experimenting with different forms and different methods and different tools and so forth. That's really, for me, what I've learned over the years is that is so powerful, and not being attached to one practice only. Again, like the attachment is the enemy of innovation, because really innovating around it and trying to combine different approaches, different practices. And then also, like, if, I really get up worrying a lot about the future, or there's a lot of anxiety, right? Doing a cold plunge deep dive for a couple of minutes to reset the body and have the mind focusing, just warming up the body, which is very powerful. Or having like a sauna ritual with friends as well from time to time, which is around this notion of deeply connecting and having conversations, but also being quiet together, and just giving everything a try, I would say, and experimenting with different practices is something I can highly recommend everyone doing.
Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom in that. There's no one meditation which is right for everybody, and also you're right. You need to use different techniques for different purposes, and also for different times of your life. And if things come up, right, and like you said, if you're agitated, then a body scan, a deep relaxation, a cold plunge, those are the right things to do. If your mind is overly busy, then a concentration practice would be a nice thing to do to really kind of like begin to narrow down the focus and to allow those thoughts to kind of like not be energized as much. Just let them kind of settle down. Yeah, and if you're feeling confused, then a mindfulness practice, right? If you need clarity, a mindfulness, get some distance from your thoughts and just begin to, see what patterns are kind of driving your behavior, and just understand, that kind of inner nature. In the Eastern traditions, the yogi or the master would really assess the student for a long period of time before he, would prescribe, so to speak, the techniques that they were to use, and they were different for everybody. And the other thing you said that's really profound is ultimately, the guru is you. That's what the term Sadguru means, right? That's you are your own wise guide. And so go inside and experiment and allow your intuition to kind of guide you to the right practice.
Hi, Mark Divine here from SealFit. After 2 years of development, I'm super stoked to announce the launch of SealFit supplements and our first product, SealFit Electro Greens. This is the highest quality organic greens you can find, combined with electrolytes into one powerful supplement. Take with 8 ounces of water in the morning, or add to your smoothie to get your day kicked off with a proper nutritional supplementation and hydration support. And you can also use it as a pick-me-up booster during the day or after a workout. It dissolves immediately, and believe it or not, it tastes great. I've had many testimonials already saying it's the best tasting greens that they have ever tried. So hoo-yah, SealFitSupplements.com, or you can find it on Amazon by searching for SealFit Electro Greens. Hoo-yah. Let's do this. Divine out. That is delicious.
Tell me about your house. I told you I was going to ask you that because you live in a very beautiful area. Like Santa Cruz is near and dear to our heart. We love it up there. And you happen to live in the mountains with lots of trees, so I'm a little bit jealous.
Yes, we really like the spirit here in Santa Cruz and California, and overall, I think for us it's important that we find that balance between like living in nature and with nature, but also, having access to schools, obviously, for our kids, and being part of a community and so forth. And what we really like to do is, again, like experimenting and just trying many, many things around our house and our property and so forth. So we grow our own food, right? And obviously we weren't born kind of like with that skill set, unfortunately. So you have to learn it at some stage, right? And again, building different areas around here that really just trying to get you into various spirits. For example, having a little art studio, right, where you can just create art, or like our kids love to do candles or produce their own herb salt or whatever it is, right? Just just having those spaces available, and then really being mindful around how those spaces really influence how you think and feel every day, right? If you go into again, in the forest, and like just for a quick walk, being outside, right, has a profound effect on how you think and how you feel.
Call
Really
it
benefiting-
situated cognition.
Absolutely, benefiting from them, right? And benefiting from that is something that everybody can do, right? So ask yourself, how do you want to feel every day, right? Do you want to feel inspired or connected or whatever it is, and create the spaces around that, right? If I want to connect with people, I have, my setup here in my little geodesic dome where I can talk to anyone around the world, right, immediately. But at the same time, I can also be by myself and focus on the work I want to do, or some writing and recording podcasts or whatever it is. So it's really about that intentionality around the spaces that you create. Really put you into different mind states, maybe, and that's something very powerful. At the same time, there is no guarantee that whenever you create a space that you're going to have the best ideas, whatever it is. I think that was the notion that most people thought when I was doing my work at Google, for example, and created the Google Garage, which, was at the headquarters, really a space where lots of people came into. And yes, they had great ideas, they experimented a lot and so forth. Most people thought like, oh, that's where innovation happens. And I told everyone like, no, you set the space to allow people to maybe experiment, try things out, removing the barriers from having an idea to building your first prototype and so forth. But it doesn't mean that there's going to be the next big success coming out of that space, because a lot of people then replicated that and said like, oh, we're going to just replicate the Google Garage that Frederik built around the world, and were then calling me a year after and said like, there's no one in that space, right? um, and I said like, oh, of course, it's not that people go there voluntarily. If you set like a strict rule around like getting your work done, and you have to be at your desk at a certain time and so forth, people won't experiment or try things out, right? If you have that scheme in your organization. And so coming back to maybe this little geodesic dome that I'm in, there's an interesting story where it was December 1st. I gathered a couple of friends around here, and we were building this dome. It was 2019, and so no one really had a clue how to do that. So we, looked up YouTube videos, and we just had like a manual that we needed to follow and so forth. So after 2 days, we finished the dome. Very proud of it. 3 months later, the pandemic was announced, March 2020. And most people came then to me, including my friends, said like, hey, Frederik, did you know that, this is going to happen? And I said like, well, I can't predict the future. No one actually can, right? I'm not in that business. But I always believed in creating your own future. And I wanted to have a space that really helps me to do my work. Maybe the kids can like do their homework here, and like I can have my plants and whatever it is. So I created the future that was then really helpful, because the pandemic hit and I had my perfect home office set up, right, which was already there. So for me, that's always a good reminder and a good story around you're in charge around your future, but don't focus too much on like, the building or like, how it looks and so forth, but focus on how you want it to be in that future. And I wanted to focus that December that I wanted to have some inspiration, some interesting space around me that really helps me to have great ideas, to focus on my writing and so forth. And that's what I focused on, and everybody can make that future happening.
I love that, and I think it's so important, that situated cognition that we're talking about, to be able to design your spaces to elicit the energy and the mood and kind of that future templating opportunity. And if most people don't have the opportunity to build a geodesic dome on their property, but it still works with just with pictures. Putting the right pictures up and the right lighting, and little feng shui, design of your workspace and living spaces can have a really profound effect. And it really is the intentionality around curating that space, recognizing that the space will affect your cognition or your experience of reality.
Absolutely, yes. And again, bringing that back to that quote from Anis Nin saying, "We don't see the world as it is; we see the world as we are." Right. For some, having such a space might be doing the opposite, right? If their tendency is to be negative, to be more like in a when anger shows up a lot of times, or anxiety and so forth, right? That space might be the perceived as the total opposite, right? It might put them under pressure. It might actually turn them off. It might not create like a good environment for people. So it's really about your inner world that is most important, and not focusing too much on what is the outer world that we want to create, and then the combination of both, I think, is where the magic happens, right? Creating such spaces, right, with things that are intentional, right? As you said, like pictures of people that you want to feel surrounded by could have a tremendous effect. At the same time, looking at your inner world and say like, hey, what is actually my relationship with that person, right? And what can I do better to have maybe a better relationship with that person? What are some things I can control?
That's awesome. We have to wrap this up. So what's next is now. I love that. How to live future ready. Is there anything else you'd like to share about the book before we kind of close down here?
So The book really has, I think, a lot to offer in ways that um, it helps people to change their relationship with their future, right? It has these stories that are really about these 14 people that, again, build remarkable lives for themselves by focusing on optimism, openness, curiosity, experimentation, empathy. And these stories are just deeply inspirational by these people. So if you're like more into like stories like that, you're going to definitely find something interesting. And then there's a part of the book that is inspired by my own experience, right? Working again with the brightest minds in Silicon Valley and beyond at Google and at Stanford University, and like what I've learned in my lives that really could maybe be beneficial to you as well. And then there's practices. That's probably like something exciting for you even, Mark, right? Because you love practices. So there's things you can try, you can experiment with, and these are easy to do, right, for anyone. And they could have a profound effect on how you live future ready and how you actually build your future moving forward. So stories, my own experience and practices, right, are really something that I want to offer to people so that they can have a different relationship with their future to hopefully find a better answer towards what future do I want to create.
That's awesome. Did you read the audiobook?
The audiobook is read by a professional audiobook actor, actually. And most people say like it's an incredible voice. It's read in a way that is really inspiring, that helps you to reflect as well, because the practices are read out in a specific way, and the stories and so forth. So I highly recommend also like listening to the audiobook.
Yeah, I look forward to that myself. Fred, how can folks reach you or learn more about you? Do you have a personal website or social media?
Yes, so you find me everywhere, absolutely. What I recommend is I have a next letter that really comes out every second Friday, which hopefully gives you a couple of more stories and experiments you can try yourself to live future ready. And this is such a joy and pure fun to write those and get those out into the world, because the response has been just overwhelming, by people like feeling inspired by the stories, but also the experiments they try themselves and how it made a difference in their life. So go check it out. It's called Next.
And is that subscribed at your website?
Exactly. Yes, you can subscribe on my website.
And for people who are listening but not seeing the show notes, that's is that your name? What's the website?
Yes, frederikgpferdt.com. Maybe easier to remember is the book's website, which is whatsnextisnowthebook.com. So you can find on both the next letter you can subscribe to. Otherwise, just feel free to send me a note on your preferred platform. Happy to respond.
Awesome. Frederik, thank you so much for your time today. Really quite an honor, and it was great to meet you. And thanks for your book and your contributions.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, and our doors are always open. We don't have locks. So if you're in the Santa Cruz area, feel free to stop by.
If I'm wandering around and I see a geodesic dome, I know I'm in the right property, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, sir. Wow, really, really interesting. Went in a completely different direction than I was expecting. Fascinating stuff. Thank you again for your time. I hope you enjoyed listening. You can find the resources mentioned in the show on my website, markdevine.com, along with the video version is on the YouTube channel. Just search for Mark Devine YouTube and you'll find us there. Connect with me on X, Instagram, and Facebook at Real Mark Devine. I'm open to your ideas for topics or guests, so please don't hesitate to contact me, preferably through my LinkedIn profile. Shout out to my awesome team, Catherine Devine and Streamline Media and Jet Studios, who work behind the scenes to bring you this podcast and my newsletter every week. If you haven't subscribed to my newsletter, go to markdevine.com to subscribe. Divine Inspiration comes out every Tuesday, and I think you'll enjoy it. And if you haven't done so, please consider rating and reviewing The Mark Devine Show wherever you listen. It's enormously helpful for visibility and credibility. As I close out, remember the power you hold to be the change you wish to see in the world. We're in this together, and fueled by conversations like this one with Frederik, we are better enabled through the wonders of technology, both inner and outer, to help make our worlds a better place. So thanks for being on the journey with me. Thanks for doing the work. And until next time, hoo-yah.